Hey everybody, welcome back to Kayfabe Critique. I'm David.
I'm Jason. What's up, y'all?
Jason, what's going on this week?
Well, this week I decided to go old school and represent the greatest athlete ever to come out of Bel Air Academy. That's right, Mr. Will Smith. Shout out. Also, I really enjoyed Super Showdown.
It was good. I enjoyed it too. And, like I was messaging you, I feel like WWE has been on a roll since SummerSlam.
They really have. I mean, the pay-per-view game has really stepped up quite a bit. I mean, the storylines are getting better. I mean, they really kind of made a turn with this whole Shield angle. I mean, even Roman's getting a little bit of love, so things are looking up.
And storylines are flowing through. We didn't just go from seeing something at SummerSlam, some things carrying over into Hell in a Cell or starting new stuff. It's pretty much everything is carrying through.
Right.
And so we're getting to see those storylines develop. And that's one of the things we had, initially when we were talking, that's one of the things we had talked about was we didn't feel like storylines were developed so much anymore, building, to where this has felt like a continuous build since SummerSlam.
It has felt like a continuous build, and even with what they're doing with this whole thing they're doing with the Shield and Strowman and those guys, they've kept that going, and that's continued to, that storyline has continued. The stuff that they're teasing with Ambrose, which I've got my opinions on how that's all actually going to end up, but I'll share those later. I'm also liking the stuff with Daniel Bryan and AJ.
I am too, and I like that The Miz is still involved in this. So it feels like The Miz and Daniel Bryan is far from over, and that this is the momentum it's going to need to carry forward all the way to Mania.
Absolutely. We might need to start thinking about going to New York in April.
One of the things that we had talked about previously when we were looking at the eras overall, we had kind of compared this era to the new generation.
Yeah.
Which was really talking about, great matches, but not really the best of story development. Mm-hmm. But now it's starting to look like maybe it's just because this era is still in its infancy, because now these storylines are really feeling like they're starting to build on top of great quality matches that we already have.
Yeah, because during the new generation, you had, I was listening to Pritchard, he was talking about growing pains, and WWE's had some growing pains going from, the reality era, if you will, transitioning into this current era that it's in. So you have those growing pains, and sometimes you gotta stumble a little bit, and you gotta figure out what you got to work with, and then you gotta move forward, because it's kind of hard to go from. It's a challenge to go from having a guy like Cena on top. You got to figure out, okay, who are you going to have on top now?
Mm-hmm. So similar to what WWE experienced coming out of the Golden Age after having Hogan on top. So kind of a segue into what we're talking about this week is the new generation era. So if you're just now joining us, kind of get you back onto where we were. We sat down and we did one of our episodes recapping every era of the WWE. Realizing there was much more content to go through, we decided to take a deeper dive into each era. So we covered the golden era last week, and this week we are now into the new generation era.
The new generation. As they would say it.
So let's take a minute to recap what brought us into the new generation. So we know everything initially was set up in territories. Mm-hmm. All regional wrestling. Vince McMahon comes in. He founded Titan Sports. He purchased Capital Sports Entertainment from his father. He trademarks the initials WWF, or World Wrestling Federation, to take it from WWF. And he begins to go around and purchase talents from the different territories, looking to create a national company, a national brand, and get syndicated cable television. He goes into really trying to deliver a higher level of entertainment, stepping away from the traditional sports side of it. He gets his mainstream star. So similar to any TV show, you're a featured actor. He gets his mainstream star in Hulk Hogan, who had movie time through Rocky III. Gets a partnership into MTV. to really push out into the mainstream popularity, get people to notice the company, continues to build upon that success, brings in celebrities, creates a super card in WrestleMania, uses that success to fund into the next year, also releasing different licenses, so toys, lunchboxes, t-shirts, posters, etc., cartoons. We see WrestleMania 2, we see WrestleMania 3, arguably the biggest show of the Golden Era, maybe the biggest show in the history of wrestling with Hogan versus Andre. That builds enough money to start Survivor Series later that year. We then see the Royal Rumble developed. We see SummerSlam developed as well. And we continue to roll. And so the transition was 1979 to 1982. The Golden Era was 1982 to 1993. And as the Golden Era, last week as we were talking, as it's coming to an end, you can feel there's a change in the WWE.
You could definitely feel it. You could even see it from looking at the crowd sizes. You could see the popularity change of the business changing. Even if you go back to late 1991, you could kind of start to see it happening, if you could think about it.
Yeah, and you can start to see, which around the time The Undertaker's coming in, you can kind of feel a different character emerging. This dark character, but the crowd's responding to it.
Yeah. You're
seeing guys like Bret Hart step into the singles divisions and putting on these great matches.
Yeah, it was starting to become... People were looking for something more, I don't know, real. If you look at like the music and movies of the time, there were a lot more... The music was a lot more violent. Movies were a lot more violent. And here, WWF's putting out this train, say your prayer, eat your vitamins. It's like, people are kind of like... No. And it took them a while to catch on with the rest of the world.
Right, and we talked about that last week, and not taking anything away from him, Hulk Hogan is arguably the biggest star in the history of the business.
No doubt.
One of the reasons I initially started watching.
Right.
But to me, it had ran its course.
Yeah.
And, I had talked about, for me, it ran its course around WrestleMania 5. I was excited to see the belt go to the Warrior. I tuned back out when I went back to Hogan at WrestleMania 7. So... a lot of people, I guess, felt similar to me because towards the end of Hogan's run during the Golden Era, the crowd's booing him.
Yeah, the crowd is booing him, and I've honestly kind of thought back to see how much they've sweetened stuff on the network because 92 Royal Rumble, they're clearly behind Sid at the end of that Royal Rumble after Flair has won it, and Hogan and Sid are kind of pushing each other around, and Hulk's like looking around for the crowd to respond to him, and they're like, nah, bro.
And so we talked about WWE didn't have a Hogan-Flair match at WrestleMania 8. You're saying, like you just mentioned, the crowd's pro-Sid, and Hogan's having that match with Sid at WrestleMania 8 instead. You never get to see Hogan versus Bret, who Bret's going to be the guy for the new generation. Leading into the start of the new generation, Bret's the guy. We never see that match where Hogan really passes the torch. Instead, we're seeing the Golden Era come to an end when Hogan's squashed by Yoko.
Yeah, and that was a shift in direction in itself because usually WWF was a good guy territory, the baby faces, where you got the champion who's the good guy and he's fighting against the monster heels trying to get the championship off of him. And that's what we had in this case. But in this case, the good guy didn't end up winning in the end. Hulk Hogan he gets squashed by Yokozuna. I think they did an overseas tour after that where they had some rematches that Hogan won by count out or something. But he was never on WWF TV again until 2002.
Right. And so, like we said, it was almost symbolic.
It was.
The squashing of Hogan was the ending of the Golden Era.
And the announcers during that match went over the top just trying to emphasize that Hulkamania was dead. Yokozuna's just squashed Hulkamania. Jim Ross keeps saying that. Bobby Heenan's saying, you're finished. Randy Savage is pointing out he couldn't body slam Yokozuna. He couldn't believe that. Because Hulk Hogan always could do that. but now he can't. So it was the end. And really, you can kind of, I mean, even think back to that WrestleMania 9. We talked about that ending last week.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like, I don't know if they were just trying to, I don't know if they were just trying to force a little bit more Hogan, or just trying to get that last little squeeze out of him, or what. But
Yeah, I think, like we had talked about, there was a continuous cycle. There was always a younger audience, a new generation, a crop of kids coming in each year. So it was almost like they were hoping, can we recreate that Hogan magic with this new population starting to watch?
Right.
But it just wasn't there.
It wasn't there, and he wasn't going to be a mid-card guy, and I don't think he wanted to be there anymore as any either.
Yeah. And so there's also some other significant things that are happening at the end of the Golden Era. We know Shawn Michaels is now a single star, and we know where that's going to go. That's going to end up becoming really huge in the new generation era.
Right.
Bret's putting on great matches. He captures his first world title during the end of the Golden Era. Mm-hmm. We had mentioned we see The Undertaker come into play, but also Monday Night Raw starts.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a catalyst for the new generation era.
It is, because I used to watch primetime wrestling, and it was they would recap a lot of the syndicated stuff that you would watch on Superstars or Wrestling Challenge, and it was cool. But then I remember, like, January 11th, 1993, watching this new Monday Night Raw. I was like, I wonder how long this will last.
And so the new generation, much shorter than the Golden Era.
Right.
It runs 1993 through 1997.
Right.
It's often criticized. One of the, possibly the most overlooked. But it's important to point out there was a lot of significance that happened in this era that shaped the current state of wrestling.
Right.
But there was also a lot of bad in this wrestling. So we know that people were starting to tune away from Hogan.
Right.
Vince McMahon decides to push towards a younger wrestler. He wants to go to the younger movement, the youth movement. Mm-hmm. And so he's done with Hogan. He decides to put Macho Man on commentary and go with the younger talent. And we really start to see early 90s color schemes come in.
Oh, God.
But we also start to see over-the-top cartoonish characters.
Yeah. I mean, and with any team, I mean, at some point you got to bring in younger talent. I mean, you see it in sports all the time. I mean, like with my beloved Dallas Cowboys, Tony Romo gets hurt, they bring in Dak Prescott. Tony Romo rides off in the sunset and is doing a great job on CBS. I mean, that's just what happens. And it happened with the new generation, and yeah, some of that stuff we used to wear in the 90s. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so this is once again, early success of the WWF at the time, around the WrestleMania 1 time, was really picking up what was popular in the culture at that time, like really teaming up with MTV. Mm-hmm. Was this an attempt to do the same thing? The color schemes, the outfits, like, Owen Hart wearing the checkered pants. So was that the thing? Was it trying to fit the wrestlers into what was popular at the time, pop culture, to get people to draw in again?
I think it was, and I also think that some of it was just, I don't know, just not being as in touch as they needed to be. I mean, Owen Hart with like the MC Hammer looking pants or whatever. I mean, that's not what a lot of people wanted to see, but again, it's growing pains. You try different stuff to see what really sticks.
So, to me, I find it a little funny that, Vince McMahon wants to go with the younger wrestler. Mm-hmm. But during this time, we also see someone like Bob Backlund come back and win the title.
Yeah, we talked about that this week. Just thinking about, Backlund won it in 94. So think about 1994. I mean, we're in the new generation. I watched a pay-per-view if I had to take a shot for every time they said new generation, I'd probably still be passed out drunk. And yeah, it's just crazy how you're talking new generation, new generation, new generation. You know who headline was the last match on King of the Ring '94?
Not off the top of my head.
Jerry Lawler and Roddy Piper.
So two older superstars. Yeah. So I mean, it's somewhat hypocritical. And I mean, in fairness, Bob Backlund was a transitional champion.
Right.
He lost the title in the same month he won it. So I think it was just so you didn't have to have a babyface and Brett face it babyface and Diesel.
Right. And I get that. And it's kind of cool to have, Bob Backlund, the older champion, win the belt back and stuff like that. And, I mean, when you look at the other channel in '94, guess what match they had in July of '94?
Right. And so, I mean, that's where I'm really going with that is that doesn't it seem a little hypocritical of telling Macho Man, who's younger than Backlund, have a seat behind the announce table. Nobody wants to see you anymore. We don't have anything for you. But yet Backlund's having matches.
Yeah, it's very hypocritical. And I think that it's a miss on Vince McMahon's part because there was so much that they could have done. I think that if he looks back on it, he probably would have done things differently. Because think about the feud he could have had with Brett. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he had some matches with Brett when he went to WCW. Think about, gosh, I mean, I've seen a match that he had with Shawn from like an overseas tour in '92. Amazing.
Yeah, he still definitely had some in the tank. And, people look at, well, he was 42 years old. Mm-hmm. Look at how old Triple H is and what he just did Saturday against The Undertaker and how old Undertaker is.
AJ Styles is 41.
Right. And so, it's like, when you look at it in terms of that, it's like he wasn't that old. And, but granted, they were pushing younger talent at the time. We know this is the generation that's really defined by Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Razor Ramon, Diesel. Mm-hmm. We also see guys like the Smoking Guns come into the scene, Double J. We see Sonny pop into the picture. But we also have where they're trying to recapture the Hogan success with Lex Luger. So they take another guy where Hogan had the big puffy look in the new generation area. They take a guy who has a more bodybuilder's physique, but they try to give him that patriot, over-the-top American hero character and have him with the body slam of the unbelievable oversized man in Yokozuna, similar to Hogan's body slam of Andre. Right, and then they try to really put the flag on him, even though you have Bret Hart, and you technically still have Randy Savage up to this point.
Yeah, and think about it. They put the belt, you have Yokozuna as your champion, and you've got Lex Luger pushing and trying to get this title shot, and he never ended up getting the belt. Never. Hey, headline SummerSlam '93. That thing ended in a count out, and they're like cheering and all that stuff. I'm like, dude, you didn't win the title. Wasn't that what it was all about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it almost feels like the new generation is defined by missed opportunities, especially in the early stages.
Yeah.
And part of it makes me wonder how much was perhaps Vince's eye wasn't fully on it. He couldn't give his full attention to it because the steroid trial is going on.
You can't help but think that had something to do with it, because if you're thinking about the potential of going to jail and losing this company that you've put your heart and soul into and how it's going to impact your wife and your children, I would imagine it would be difficult to concentrate. And so I think that played something into it. I also just kind of wonder, just as the business as a whole, to not just put it all on Vince McMahon, just the fact that the business as a whole was still doing the cartoonish type characters, the gimmicks, like I'm just thinking about Colonel Parker, for example, in WCW, like the Dungeon of Doom and all that cartoonish type stuff. So I think the business as a whole wasn't really in tune with where the world was going. Mm-hmm. It was still wrestling.
Right, and so, just to kind of recap on the steroid trial. So you had former wrestlers lining up, started with Nails, but former wrestlers lining up saying that they purchased steroids from a doctor on the WWE payroll, mm-hmm. and, some trying to say that they felt they were pressured into taking steroids. Of course, Vince McMahon is acquitted on all charges, mm-hmm. but during that time, it could be understandable that couldn't be fully focused on what's going on.
Yeah, he couldn't be fully focused, and part of that steroid trial really kind of pushed us towards where we've got the smaller wrestlers, because in the 80s, they was doing steroids. I mean, it was all over. It was all over sports. I mean, I was watching something on Brian Bosworth the other day. He's doing steroids, so it was all over the sports world. So, once guys had to come off the steroids, you have to. It's like, okay, you can't just get over on being big anymore. You got to be able to work in the ring. Well, who can work in the ring? Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels.
Right, and it wasn't, like it is today. There weren't as many drug tests going on because it wasn't illegal.
Yeah.
At the time, and so it was that transition period mm-hmm. where everything started to change. But you're right, they went with a smaller wrestler, mm-hmm. the more athletic wrestler.
Right.
And so, was it that could that be why, you had mentioned earlier that it took him a while to catch up what was going on in the world, mm-hmm. that the fans had changed away from, they didn't want the cartoonish, is that why it took him so long to catch on, because he was distracted?
I don't think that that's totally why he didn't catch on. I think some of it's just...
Or was part of it overconfident because this is what worked for so long, I don't need to change?
I won't say he thought he didn't need to change. I just don't know if he knew what direction he needed to go into in some cases, because if you had something that worked for the Hogan type formula had it worked for eons. Going back to Bob Backlund, mm-hmm. Bruno Sammartino. Now you've got to change course, and you really don't know. So you've really got, I think that, because it's just I think it's just a function of getting older. I can't keep track of what's going with everything that's going on mm-hmm. anymore.
Yeah, and I guess my question with that really is, part of it makes me think, was he really in tune and didn't know what to do? Because, he obviously picks up the crowds booing Hogan.
Right.
He kept going with Hogan past that point, though.
Right.
He also doesn't see the need for Savage. He doesn't see the need for Hogan. So part of that makes me think it's a bit of an overconfidence of, I can build new stars. I don't need to rely on these older stars, which from a business standpoint, that continuity of business, it makes sense. You need those new stars mm-hmm. for the future, for long term. So it's potential that he just is seeing long term and not thinking of the immediate gain. But because of that, you have a guy who initially started off auditioning as an announcer mm-hmm. for WWE, doesn't get the job, mm-hmm. goes on to become an announcer for WCW, ends up becoming an executive producer for WCW, mm-hmm. becomes president of WCW, and ends up signing Hulk Hogan.
Right.
And so, of course, we're talking about WCW and Eric Bischoff. And so he signs Hulk Hogan in 1994.
Brother.
And immediately eyes turn to WCW to see what's going on.
Mine did.
Yeah, so people are now, because Hogan's still a big marketable name, people tune in to see what's going on. And he does what WWE did not do at WrestleMania 8. Mm-hmm. And Hogan's first match is on pay-per-view against Ric Flair. And it, to that point, becomes the biggest to-date pay-per-view in WCW.
Without a doubt. That's the match that people wanted to see. I mean, it had happened. The match had happened, but it hadn't happened on pay-per-view, and it wasn't for the title. I mean, they went all out. And Hogan, he didn't... I mean, at first he thought he was really done with wrestling because he was doing Thunder in Paradise or whatever, but he came to WCW in large part because he trusted Ric Flair.
Right.
And when that announcement got made, that was I mean, the only thing I can think of close to it is like when like LeBron decides to sign somewhere else.
Right. And so, part of that could have been, Vince McMahon has a prime time Monday night show. Mm-hmm. WCW hadn't really been competition up to this point. Mm-hmm. Their television is Saturday evening.
Right.
And so maybe he doesn't feel that WCW would have been able to pull some of his talent or really know what to do with the talent such as a Hogan. But WCW brings him in. Bischoff brings him in. They're making it work. And then also brings in Randy Savage now.
Right.
So arguably the two biggest stars to date in WWE history are now on WCW, and we now have some competition out there.
Right. You got competition, and you've got known commodities. I mean, people who didn't even watch wrestling, they know who Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage were. I mean, Hulk Hogan had been in movies. Mm-hmm. Randy Savage had the Slim Jim endorsement. So people knew who they were, and people probably grew up with them. So there was a familiarity. So right. You turn over there, and then it's like, oh, well, who's this Sting guy?
Yeah, and they have the mainstream appeal, like you're saying, and so it's able to pull people in. And so now other people are starting to follow. Mm-hmm. And of course, WCW is doing well with it, but as these guys come in, they're kind of coming in very similar to what they were in the WWE.
Right.
So we're feeling almost a cartoonish look across the board.
Right.
But the difference is WCW responds a little bit quicker. Where WWE is, Bret Hart's your champion, then Diesel, Bob Backlund has his little run, and then Diesel becomes a champion for almost nearly a year. Mm-hmm. WWE's killing it in terms of match quality.
Yeah.
A lot of people overlook the quality of matches during the new generation.
Right.
Because they're so hung up on the gimmick characters and cheesy storylines.
Yeah, once you got beyond the gimmicks and stuff like that, I mean, you can strip away the Jeff Jarrett singing the song, being the country singer and stuff like that. Him and Shawn Michaels, wow.
Right, yeah, they have a great match in July of 95. And so you're having this in the WWE Great Wrestling. WCW's got the more established stars and getting attention, but WCW recognizes the need to change quicker. Right. And so in 1995, they really become competition as Monday Night Nitro launches.
Right. And they launched Nitro, and I think part of WCW's appeal was also that you had fresh matchups. I mean, you had the Hogan-Flair matchup. You had Flair-Savage, which we had gotten a taste of in WWF, but not much. But you had, I'm looking up here, you've got Lex Luger. You had a Luger... Well, I think they had a Luger-Hogan match on one of the first Nitros. I mean, when I'm thinking about the Horsemen, I'm thinking about, the Giant, stuff like that. So then it becomes, okay, so we really want to step up. So, yeah, we create Nitro.
Yeah, and like we were saying, Luger was the guy who was supposed to be the next Hogan in WWE.
Right.
And Nitro kicks off with Luger, who had just wrestled the night before WWE, showing up on Monday Nitro.
And I remember watching that show live. Yes, I'm old. I am 40. But I remember watching that, and I was just like, wait a minute. Doesn't he work for WWF? I mean, I hadn't been watching as much during that time, but I knew enough to know that Luger was WWF. And then I see him on Nitro. I'm like,
Yeah, and so WCW quickly realizes, because they start to experience what WWE was experiencing at the end of the Golden Era, the crowd starts to boo Hogan there as well.
Yeah.
The red and yellow ran its course even faster in WCW. And so the crowd starts to boo him. Bischoff recognizes it, and he says, that he actually had this ideal going for about a year before it surfaced. Mm-hmm. But he's really trying to find this reality angle that he wants to bring in. He wants to bring in a reality angle that's going to push the boundary, and he wants to push it in a way of a new company emerging within a company. Mm-hmm. And he gets two current WWE stars at the time. Two current WWE stars. One, Diesel, who was WWE champion for almost a year. Mm-hmm. Razor Ramon, multiple-time Intercontinental champion. Both former WCW stars. And so he brings them back in they weren't happy with their first run in WCW. They left to become bigger stars, and now they're coming back to take their revenge on WCW. And we know where that leads. They end up turning Hogan heel, creates the NWO, creating arguably the biggest faction in the history of wrestling, the most famous, the most attention-grabbing, and it was such attention-grabbing that the ratings quickly shift.
Yeah, I mean, say what we will, where Hulk Hogan went, it seems like eyeballs at least went initially out of curiosity, and then it was like, yeah, we've seen this whole red and yellow tearing the shirt. I remember one episode he went into the Dungeon of Doom or something like that, and they even brought back Zeus or Z Gangsta at one point. But then, July 7th, 1996, everybody's eyeballs turned right back because I'm like, Hulk Hogan's turned bad?
Yeah. And it's fair to say that even before the NWO, when Nitro started in September 95, up until the NWO, they had some Monday night victories in the ratings, even before that, even before Hall and Nash showed up. Mm-hmm. But when Hall and Nash showed up and then the NWO formed, it was so different.
Yeah, even thinking about just the way that it all happened. We didn't have the internet. People had dirt sheets, but I didn't know Razor Ramon was leaving. Mm-hmm. I didn't know Diesel was leaving. Diesel actually wrestled his last WWE pay-per-view up to that point in my hometown in Omaha against Shawn Michaels at In Your House. So I'm watching Nitro on May 27th, and I see this guy coming down, like the entrance, coming down through the stands, and this guy comes into the ring, and he asks for a microphone. I'm like, that's Razor Ramon.
Yeah, and the way they did it, the guys just stopped wrestling.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't like he jumped in the ring and beat people up. It was like he just walked in the ring like he didn't care what was going on. And it was so shocking that it felt real.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it felt like, because you're a WCW wrestler, and then you see this guy coming into the ring, and you don't know it's like. It felt like a takeover. You didn't know if this guy was crazy. You didn't know if this was part of the show. Whatever. So yeah, they brought him in perfectly.
Yeah, and they would do their best. They really didn't want to give him attention. They really didn't want to talk to him. But Hall and Nash just keep popping back up. They're trying to make it look like they just are trying to get him out of the arena. So it adds to that realism feel. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people, initially say, two different points I want to make. A lot of people initially say that, they came over there as their WWE characters, which is somewhat of a fair assessment in terms of what Scott Hall was doing, because he came over using the Razor Ramon accent.
Yeah.
However, you've heard people say, well, he showed up and said, "Hey yo." He never said "Hey yo" as Razor Ramon.
No, he didn't.
And the toothpick thing goes beyond Razor Ramon. It went back to when he was in WCW originally as the Diamond Stud.
Right.
His hairstyle goes back to originally as the Diamond Stud.
Right.
So a lot of that, he's bringing back what he originally had in WCW. I think where they went with the two things that drove him to go to it that really went a bit too far was, one, the toothpick, or sorry, one, the accent, and two, saying you people know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. Where if he would have thrown in any sort of diamond stud comment after saying those things, they could have said that's why he's telling people you know who I am.
Right.
But without adding that diamond stud to it, it allowed WWE to say he's trying to tell people he's Razor Ramon.
Right. And I can see where WWE is coming from, but I also, from a storytelling standpoint, I appreciated it because it's like, yeah, I do know who you are, but no, I don't know why you're here. So I'm going to keep watching to see why the hell you are here.
Right. And in fairness to WCW, Vince McMahon had pulled a lot of talent from other territories to build a golden era. And he repackaged them a little bit different, but for the most part, they were still who they were in other territories. And so, WCW was kind of doing the same thing.
I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, if it's good enough, if you're signing a free agent wide receiver, you're not signing that wide receiver to be your running back. You're signing him to be who he is. You're signing him to be a wide receiver. Don't try to play with people. It's like, that's Diesel. That's Razor Ramon. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. I mean, until they said it was Hall and Nash, even in the back of my mind, they're still Diesel and Razor Ramon.
Yeah, and then, in fairness, do you think it would have worked if Hall came out using his actual voice? Because to me, I think it would have been just as big. I don't think the accent is what sold it.
No, I don't think it did. I don't think the accent did it at all. I think it was the fact that he had been on WWF for so long, had been one of the top guys over there, so people knew who he was.
Yeah, and I think that was it, is that they were recognizable as themselves. And so, similar to what they got from Hogan.
Right. I mean, let's point out that we're looking at a picture of Hulk Hogan from when he first got to WCW. Let's see. His yellow shirt. He had a yellow shirt in WWF. Red writing. Had red writing in WWF. Yellow bandana with red writing. He had a bandana, many different colors of bandanas in WWF.
Still tore the shirt.
Still cupping his ears.
Right, and so, to me, it's like, okay, I get it. I think this was more, they were upset because WCW, they knew early on WCW struck gold.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really more where it came from. But now WCW pushes it even further. They have more talent jumping. You have Alundra Blaze show up as Medusa and drop the WWE women's title into the trash on Nitro.
Which, how often did they have women's matches during that time anyway?
Right. Yeah, and in fairness, I really don't remember much in terms of the women's divisions until Sable really started, when she became the women's champion. And then it became more recognizable to me during the Trish Stratus time. And now it's one of the most looked forward to part of the show, but at this point, yeah, you're right, it really wasn't.
Right. So, for her to put it in the trash, again, this is something that's never been done before. This is true competition. You're calling your competition basically trash. Hey, it's like, come on, what you gonna do?
Yeah, and then you also have the real hard-hitting shot from Nitro is knowing that Raw has a lot of taped shows. They start giving away the results of those shows on Nitro because Nitro's live. Yeah,
during this time, I very rarely, I spent more of my time watching WCW because I had started college at the time, and in the dorms, we would basically watch WCW. WWF, it was just between 94 and 95, it's just, we weren't feeling it. And when the NWO came around, it was just there was no WWF.
All right. And so you got to look at some of the other things, the great things that, Eric Bischoff really did in WCW. So you had the NWO, you had, he's giving results and stuff, but he was able to take WCW from losing money to making money.
Right.
He's able to create an 83-week straight winning streak in the ratings.
Which is also a great podcast.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But he really changes the business and shapes what we're seeing today. He pushes the pay-per-views.
Right.
To where you went from a handful of pay-per-views to where he pushes it to have 12 pay-per-views a year.
Right. He changed the entire business model of wrestling because before Nitro was live, Monday Night Raw may have been live. I think Monday Night Raw was live sometimes, but before Nitro went live all the time, almost every wrestling show was taped.
Yeah, you had, the initial days of Raw, what was it, 1 out of every 3 or 4 was live. And then eventually it got to every other week was live.
Right.
But Nitro pushed them to go live every week.
Right.
Nitro pushed them to expand the pay-per-views. He also creates the recurring pay-per-views. Mm-hmm. So, Great American Bash, Road Wild, Halloween Havoc. He creates a name for each pay-per-view and the recurring pay-per-views. And so it allows those pay-per-views to become something people look forward to, theme pay-per-views, if you will. Mm-hmm. He mentioned, making the pay-per-view itself like a character.
Right.
And so he tries to create something special for each pay-per-view, which is stuff we see the WWE do now.
Right. He was truly visionary, and what you need, it always, to me, it is about competition. It's like, how do you get better? You need to realize that you always have to think that there's somebody that's trying to be better than you. So it's going to push you to be better. Magic and Larry, any rivalry you can think of, it's like, I got to beat this guy. Mm-hmm. So in order for me to beat this guy, I got to step my game up.
Yeah. He also does something that was different than what we were used to seeing. WWE was the land of the giants. He brings in the cruiserweights.
Oh my gosh.
And he's bringing in talent from, Mexico, Japan, etc. Mm-hmm. And these guys are putting on styles of matches that we weren't used to seeing on TV at this point.
Right. And the American crowd wasn't used to it, but they got used to it real quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that high energy really brought a lot of attention in, and held you engaged while you had something like the NWO storyline going to really keep you there.
Right.
And so it appealed to both. It had those who wanted to see good wrestling. Mm-hmm. You would get to see the cruiserweights.
Right.
And for your storytelling, your, entertainment appeal, you had the NWO.
Right.
And so he was hitting with a 1-2 punch. He also had the power plant.
Yep.
Which, now we know WWE has the Performance Center, and they have NXT. And with the cruiserweights, we know WWE tried it with the light heavyweights, and then eventually, now we have 205 Live. But here were 2 more things that he threw out that really helped lead to where we are today. Yeah,
Bischoff was a genius in a lot of regards. He'll say himself there were things that he messed up on, but his impact on the business is definitely still felt.
Yeah, so if it wasn't for Eric Bischoff, would we have seen wrestling reach the level it did?
No.
Because if it wasn't for him creating Nitro, we already said all the changes that happened because of that. And if it wasn't for the NWO, we wouldn't have had an Attitude Era in WWE.
Right,
And those 2 things are what led to the ratings boom.
Think about it. What would Ali have been without a Frazier?
Mm-hmm.
Ali probably still would have been great, but his best fights were with his greatest rival, which was Joe Frazier. They pulled the best out of each other. Mm-hmm. And that's what WCW did for WWF.
And so, we had talked about, we kind of went through the change of going back to think of WWE while this is going on. So we know when you look at the new generation, you know, it kicks off with Bret Hart as champion. Mm-hmm. You know, you get Bret Hart as champion in WrestleMania 10. You then had the belt go to Backlund. The belt goes to Diesel for almost a year. Bret gets the belt back.
Mm-hmm. Survivor Series 95.
Yep. And then you had the Iron Man match with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
Which, an amazing match. Shawn Michaels takes the belt. And Shawn's having great matches during this time. He's having a great run. He's having great matches. But during this time, while the NWO is going on, WWE storylines are still really campy. You see Ron Simmons brought in a gladiator costume. And you're just...
Damn!
Yeah, and so this is what really bothers me is... What do you think it was the reason it took Vince so long to recognize the change in the fans? You know, on the other side, people are watching this. You're losing in the ratings. You're seeing what they're doing. Why are you still going to the formula that's not working?
I think I wish we could ask him that. I just maybe he just did not. Maybe he just felt that he knew what the people wanted better than they wanted. I mean, as he would say as Mr. McMahon later. I mean, and also think about it, during this time, he brought in Steve Austin as the ringmaster.
Right. And gave him a mouthpiece. Even though he had been, you know, stunning Steve Austin, who was able to deliver promos. He had went to ECW and was, you know, people... To this day, you can still find highlights of his ECW promos on, like Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff and everything. But then you bring him in and give him a mouthpiece.
A good one, no doubt, but...
Right.
I was listening to Bruce Pritchard, and he was like... Ted DiBiase didn't feel like Austin needed a mouthpiece. Austin didn't feel like he needed a mouthpiece, so it was just kind of like a mismatch.
Right, and so... You know, I look at, like, the golden era, and you see during the territory system the way wrestling is, but then you look at the golden era because he knew what people would want before they were ever able to see it. Talking about Vince McMahon. He knew that a national syndicated show was going to work. He envisioned WrestleMania. He knew once again what people would want before they were able to see it. So was it that situation here?
It has to be.
You know, because Steve Jobs had that quote of, people don't know what they want until you show them. Which was really in terms of an innovative company in Apple. So in WWE, also being, you know, creative and innovative, you know, is it that same thing that he thought he knew what was going on, even though the obvious was sitting across from him?
I think it was that, and I also think that he had people around him that did not want, that were afraid to tell him, bro, this ain't it. And one guy, you know where I'm going, had the cojones to say, this is not working.
Yeah, and so it's, you know, everyone talks about, you know, that famous speech where, you know, Vince Russo comes to him and tells him, there's 2 wrestling shows, one of them's bad, and one of them's good, and here's why. And so, you know, when you think of the stuff that's going on, you know, now, and Bret Hart's gone during this time.
Yep.
You know, he's all filming Lonesome Dove, so Shawn Michaels is really carrying the company by himself, but he's stuck into where they're trying to make him the clean-cut babyface, even though he had, most of his career had been a heel, and a successful heel. You had a chance for him to be edgy.
And there was nothing clean cut about Shawn Michaels at that time. He'll even tell you that. Right.
And so you had a chance for him to be edgy and to compete against his buddies on the other channel now, because we all know one of the things that the new generation is famous for is backstage of the Click forming.
Right.
And so now you have half of the Click dominating on one side, but you still have the other half who has that same personality that you can do stuff with, but you're not.
Yeah, you got Shawn Michaels being the, like you said, the white meat baby face, and you've got Triple H being Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the Greenwich Elite, which, I mean, that's not who he was off screen. So I think that when do you think they finally caught on? Because
Well, so it's kind of interesting because to me, it feels like the change initially starts. It takes a little while to fully catch up, but it feels like it initially starts late '96 when Bret Hart comes back.
yep,
Because when Bret comes back, Bret's promos feel real.
yeah,
He comes back and he's, making comments about Shawn Michaels right off the bat and really developing that heated rivalry that we know and that we covered in our Montreal Screwjob episode. And, he has a rivalry with Austin that's a little bit darker than we normally had seen up to that point.
yeah, and even thinking about '96 as a whole, we got to go back to King of the Ring 1996, which I just listened to the podcast of, and you think about the reaction that Austin 316 promo got. To me, that moment symbolized the beginning. That moment, if that moment didn't tell you that there was a shift happening at WWF, I don't know what it was going to take. Because when he said Austin 316 says, "I just whipped your ass," and that crowd popped, it's like, oh.
And so it makes me wonder, when you look at the golden era, as it's coming to an end, even about a year before it's ending, you can feel the change happening. Mm-hmm. And this is similar in the new generation. Mm-hmm. But in the new generation, it feels more of it's the fans that are forcing the change.
Absolutely, because they're spending their money.
Right, where at the golden era, like the change of eras feels like it was forced upon everybody.
And to a degree it was, but the crowd also did have a role with, booing Hogan, but to a degree it did feel like it was kind of forced on us.
Yeah, so I mean, booing Hogan, yeah, so definitely, you could have went with the younger athlete, but kept with a similar approach of the golden era.
Right.
And not going with the colors and the gimmick characters. Mm-hmm. It felt like that was pushed upon us to where the new generation coming to an end really felt like it's the crowd pushing it.
Right.
They're cheering for Austin, who's supposed to be the bad guy, who's supposed to be your heel. They're cheering for him. When Bret comes back and Shawn starts to show a little bit of attitude, the crowd starts to respond to him again.
Right. And like at Survivor Series 96, you had Austin getting a positive reaction from the crowd at the Garden, which the Garden crowd is a good barometer for where you're at as a performer in any walk of life. But you also have the crowd booing Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series, and they cheered when Sid hit Jose Lothario with the camera.
Right, and so they're cheering the heel in that match where, Shawn, arguably the greatest wrestler of all time, but he was packaged in a way that the crowd just wasn't responding to him. I mean, he was delivering the matches. I mean, look at his match with Mankind from Mind Games in September.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, he had so many great matches during that time. But yet, because of how it was packaged, the crowd wasn't responding. So, like you mentioned, Vince Russo comes in, he joins the writing team, and regardless of what people say about him, the minute he joined the writing team, things changed. It felt different.
Yeah, it was obviously different at that point, and it became more of a product that you actually wanted to watch. That it's like it started to feel less predictable.
Right, and so as the new generation is coming to a close in 1997, really, you're starting to feel things become more intense. Vince Russo is now part of the writing staff, and you're starting to feel the shift into what's going to become the Attitude Era. People are starting to catch on to that. They're starting to look in. But on the other side, WCW is still just as hot, running full steam ahead with the NWO. Right. And so, as the new generation is coming to an end, everything's about to explode. Wrestling's about to get huge.
Oh, my God.
And it's going to take off more mainstream than we've ever seen it.
Yeah, I mean, 1997 is probably my favorite year in the history of wrestling. Because when you think about 1997 and everything that happened in that year, it impacted so much of what we see now. It shaped the business for at least, well, hell, it shaped the business for at least the next 21 years.
Right, and I like to tell people, like, if you didn't watch during that time, start with SummerSlam 97. And that's a good spot to start for what's going to become the Attitude Era.
Yeah, that's a great spot. And I would also throw in there WrestleMania 13 because that the Bret Hart Steve Austin match, that match is one of the top 5 WrestleMania matches ever.
Mm-hmm. So, thinking back on the new generation, what is the most memorable thing for you? What comes to mind?
The Iron Man match comes to mind. Just Growing Pains really comes to mind because you had 2 organizations trying to figure out where do we go from here because what we've been doing isn't working. And once they caught on, I mean, it was like it was going to blow the roof off because once that NWO thing started, that's another moment. When Hulk Hogan dropped that leg, that was just like that might be the most seismic moment of that era.
Yeah, and so when I think of the new generation in WWE, I immediately think of the cartoonish, campy look. And I think...
Doink.
Right, and I think of... I remember the image of a lot of the wrestlers in the company all in the ring, and they had that 90s look. And you have Hall, Nash, which were Diesel and Razor at the time, Shawn Michaels and 1-2-3 Kid, Sean Waltman, X-Pac, standing there together, and they're kind of flashing the click sign, but you kind of have that, all the rest of the guys around them are kind of gimmicky characters.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the symbolic image that I think of because it's like here these guys were trying to be real. Mm-hmm. And those were the guys that are going to really shape wrestling for the future, with all the guys behind them are the gimmicky of what they're trying to get past. So to me, that was almost like very telling of that image of here these guys are at the forefront with what needs to be behind is in the back. And so because we know Diesel and Razor are going to cross over and do what wrestling needs to be done in NWO, and yet Shawn Michaels is going to be a huge part of the Attitude Era.
Yeah, and just thinking back, when you mentioned the cartoony stuff, I thought about like when they would put out like these songs, like the WrestleMania song that Linda McMahon uses for her entrance, and then like they had this SummerSlam Slam Jam song, and just I think about how just cheesy that stuff was. It was like, ugh.
So what were some of your favorite matches of the new generation?
Oh, I mean, again, you got to go to Shawn and Bret at WrestleMania 12. WrestleMania 10, Shawn and Razor for the IC title. Austin and Bret, pick one. Shawn and Mankind was another one. I keep saying Shawn for some reason. Let me try to think. Am I forgetting anything? There was, I mean, Austin and Shawn actually had some great matches too.
Yeah, they have a match in October of 97. Sorry, October of 96. Sorry, on Monday Night Raw. They have an October 96 match that's really good.
Yeah. And also think about Shawn versus Diesel for WrestleMania 11 because, again, that was another match where the heel started getting cheered because Shawn really stole the show.
Yeah, and it's funny that you keep, Shawn, and Bret because those are the two guys that, to me, are what carried WWE through this time. Yeah. And mine are similar. I have, starting with Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect. Bret Hart versus Owen Hart. Shawn versus Razor at WrestleMania 10. Shawn Michaels versus Double J, which we had mentioned earlier. Bret Hart versus his brother-in-law, Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, at Survivor Series 95. December of 1995.
Yeah.
Bret versus Shawn at WrestleMania 12. Bret versus Diesel, not only WrestleMania 11, but in April of 96.
Yeah.
At Good Friends, Better Enemies.
Yeah.
Shawn versus Mankind. I like Shawn versus Mankind at Mind Games, but I also love their August of 97, which is kind of the transition era, but, it's still technically the New Generation part, and that match, had they given enough time, could have outdone Mind Games.
Oh, easily.
And Bret versus Austin Survivor Series and Bret versus Austin WrestleMania.
Gosh, another one. Where did it just came to me? There was another one that I cannot think of it all of a sudden. I said, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna kill me." Oh no! I still can't remember it. Shawn versus. Oh my gosh, this is gonna bother me all night because I can't remember the match that I'm thinking of. But Bret versus Owen, WrestleMania 10.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
How can I forget? My gosh, how can I forget that match?
But yeah, so the New Generation, a lot of good matches. Bad characters, bad storylines. But during that time, we see the competition light the fire that's going to set WWE into one of its biggest eras of all time, which we will cover next week.
Right, and you start to see the pieces get put into place because also in 1996, we had some guy named Dwayne Johnson debut as Rocky Maivia at Survivor Series 96. And he had a little bit of a role in the business.
Right. So, yeah, and you see a lot of stuff, Mankind coming in. So, leaving WCW as Cactus Jack, coming in as Mankind. So, those pieces are in place. And Vince Russo joins the writing staff, and he's got that push of let's be edgy. And so next week we will dive into the Attitude Era.
Everyone, which is probably, most people I talk to, is their favorite era.
Yeah, definitely mine. Attitude Era is definitely my favorite, so I'm looking forward to covering that next week. And one of the other things that we're talking about is, continue to watch, our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please go out there and subscribe. You can also see our regular episodes, but we're also going to start bringing you some other content as well on there. You'll start seeing some shorter videos you can click on, but we'll continue to bring the larger episodes each week as we dive into topics. But look for some more stuff from us as well. You'll be able to see that on our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook, Instagram, a follow on Twitter, and as soon as we have everything built up that we need, that podcast will be coming.
Yes, indeed. Be looking forward to the next episode next week.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in.